Welcome to True Mysteries of the Pacific Northwest, stories of strange and unexplained people, places, and events, often obscured by the mists of time. I'm your host, Kit Crum. This particular podcast involves the state of Oregon and Washington to a degree, but ranges around in its content, so you got to bear with me a little bit. I grew up in the tiny town of Cupertino, California. And it was a tiny town when I grew up, unincorporated. Anyway, we had a number of earthquakes over the years that I was living there, and the word was the big one would take out San Francisco, the big one. About 30 years ago, I moved to Ashland, Oregon, and all the talk was about the Cascadian subduction zone quake that would take out the coast from Washington state south 700 miles down to portions of the California coast. But the big one probably will not be an earthquake at all. I was doing some research for my latest book and discovered that the date that Oregon became a state, 1859, was also the date a solar flare struck the Earth. The effect was worldwide. Now, in Oregon at the time, telegraph service was intact between Portland and Oregon City. That began in 1855, and Corvallis in 1856, and the same year for Jacksonville. On September 2nd, 1859, an incredible storm of charged particles sent by the sun slammed into Earth's atmosphere, overpowered it, and caused havoc on the ground. Telegraph wires and high-tech stuff of the time suddenly shorted out in the United States and Europe, igniting widespread fires. Colorful aurora, normally considered seen in the polar regions, were seen as far south as Cuba. And these aurora borealis, colored northern lights, whatever you want to call them, were not just in the sky. They seemed, some of them, along the ground. What happened? Earth's magnetic field normally protects the surface of the planet from some storms. In 1859, the planet's defenses were overwhelmed. Over the past decade, similar but less powerful storms have likewise busted through, giving scientists insights into what will eventually happen again. The outlook is not rosy. The solar storm of 1859 was 3 times more powerful than the one that cut to the entire Canadian province into a blackout back in 1989. Experts say if it happened today, it could result in unthinkable damage to our technologies. Now, those telegraph connections I mentioned in Portland, Oregon City, Corvallis, and Jacksonville were all fried. The Portland Telegraph Station reportedly caught on fire. Also, trains across the state of Oregon came to a halt when the tracks were electrified. What's commonly referred to as the northern lights, or the aurora borealis, could be seen from anywhere in the state and appeared not just in the sky, but for many it could be seen near ground level. Now, this kind of solar flare is referred to as a CME, which emanates from the sun. It is a low-frequency event. To have an impact on anything, it requires a long antenna. Our power lines are the perfect antenna for receiving this energy. The big issue is that this can destroy the large transformers. Now, these are not the little garbage cans on a telephone pole you see. These are huge transformers. There are no spares of these, and it takes years to get a new one built. There is a precedent for concern. In 1859, a large CME caused power surges in telegraph wires strong enough to start fires at stations, as we know, in Portland. And this particular solar flare was known as a Carrington event. It caused minor damage because our electrical technology was really in its infancy. But what if we were hit today by that same size solar flare? What are the chances? Well, there was a similar solar flare 62 years later in 1921. That would be almost exactly 100 years ago. Then, 91 years later, in 2012, another solar flare. And in 2017, another solar flare. There was a solar flare that just missed the Earth. Had it struck, it unlike an EMP bomb that is directed to, say, Russia or China or the United States. These solar flares involve the entire Earth. The last large solar flare that could have done tremendous damage was April 4th, 2021. This is Kit Crum advising you to build a Faraday cage, and if you don't know what that is, look it up. Thanks for listening.